Alright guys, we're going to be looking at page 5 and 6 in our notebooks. Actually, I want to start on page 5 and just talk about a couple of things. First of all, the definition of absolute value. So, truly the definition of absolute value is the distance away from 0. And distance is always positive. So, for example, the absolute value of 5 is 5. Another example is the absolute value of negative 10 is 10. Now really the only time you can get a negative number is if you had a negative in front of your absolute value, like the absolute value of negative 7. The absolute value of 7 with a negative in front like that. Absolute value is kind of like a parenthesis in so much as it needs to be done first, and it is telling you to take the positive of. So the absolute value of 7 is 7, and then there's a negative out front, so your answer here is negative 7. So hopefully that's kind of clear. So let's jump over here where we're actually solving some things. Now, I talked about the other day when we were going over our homework, when you want to get rid of the absolute value bars, you have to do something. Whenever you're undoing stuff, there has to be an undo button. And so the undo button for absolute values is to make two equations. You take whatever's inside the absolute value, and then you write it equal to the positive and then the negative solution. So that one's super easy, and it's just saying that your solution can be negative 3 or it can be 3. So that's what this little graph is for. So I think we're going to skip the next two because those are pretty straightforward. You can try those. We open this up. Ooh, I shouldn't have used that pen. Let's do some pencil now so it doesn't bleed through. If I want to get rid of the absolute value bars, I need to make two equations. Whatever is inside the bars stays absolutely the same. Whatever is on the outside, you keep it the first time. The second time, you make it negative. So then I would just solve, because now x is not all along, so I'd have x is 3. Or over here, when I add 1, I get a different answer. X could also be negative 1. So that's okay to have different answers. If you're not sure, you can plug them in, like 3 minus 1 is 2, the absolute value of 2 is 2. Negative 1 minus 1 is negative 2, the absolute value of that is 2. And so then we could graph our answers. We have negative 1 and 3. You notice I'm not really that perfect about my numbers on my number line. That's fine. We'll try one more like this at the very bottom here. So to get rid of my absolute value bars, I need to write two equations. So x minus 12 equals 14, and then the other one, I make it negative 14. And so for both, I would add 12 to get x equals 26. Over here, now I get x equals negative 2. Hopefully that's okay. Now the last two that I have for you are a little different, and they're different because the others just had absolute value bars all by themselves. Here the absolute values aren't alone, and so you really first need to get them alone. So initially I would subtract the 3 so that the absolute value bars would be all by themselves. And then to get rid of those, now I make my two equations. So x minus 2 equals 2. X minus 2 equals negative 2. Then we just solve because x is not alone, so we get x equals 4. And over here we get x equals 0. So I'm going to have you try the last one. If you're not quite sure, I'll have the answer up in my notebook and you can come check when you're done. The last thing that I want to say is sometimes with absolute values, you may get solutions that do not exist. So I'm going to do one more. I lied. I'm going to do one more. Back on page 5. So I go to page 5, one last example. If I have something like this. I have 2 absolute value, 2x plus 9, and the absolute value plus 12 equals 10. Now, just like with that last one, we want to get our absolute value bars alone. They're kind of like parentheses. So I would subtract the 12 first. We'd have 2 absolute value 2x plus 9 equals negative 2. Now, they're unlike parentheses in so much as you cannot distribute over absolute values. You actually need to get rid of that 2, and that 2 is being multiplied, so I would divide it away. And so we have absolute value of 2x plus 9 equals negative 1. Now that my absolute value bars are alone, we could go make two equations and solve, but right here, right now, I know that I'm not going to have any solution. And that's because, like I said above, the absolute value is the distance away from 0, which is always positive. And these absolute value bars are not equal to a positive number. Therefore, this has no solution. So your answer here would be no solution. That's it.